David, you're a professor of corporate responsibility. The Guardian has named you one of the top 10 global tweeters on sustainable leadership, along actually with Al Gore and Tim Cook and Facebook CEO Sheryl. So I would really be interested in your views about the crisis and the future. So I wonder, like, what do you think? How will Corona affect our future, and how can our society and economy maybe even benefit from the crisis in the future?
So some great questions there, Thorsten. So I think on the one hand, I would argue that people who say nothing will be the same again, everything is going to change, will be wrong.
Yeah.
Equally, those people who say nothing will really change, it'll be back to business as usual just as soon as the pandemic is under control, I think they will also be very wrong as well. And I think the really interesting questions are, what are those things where if we work really hard, we might be able to push more change than might otherwise occur post the coronavirus crisis. And as soon as it really started back in January, indeed in China back in December, I was actually in Asia at the beginning of February, so already experiencing some of the early onset of the crisis and starting to think about it then. And there was a quotation that went through my mind straight away, which was from Rahm Emanuel, who was the mayor of Chicago, and before that was President Obama's first chief of staff. And he very famously once said that you should never let a good crisis go to waste. In other words, you should use the opportunity of people feeling that there needs to be change to move things in the kind of positive direction. So I'm actually part of various different conversations right now, which are broadly under the theme of build back better. And I'm exploring with lots of other people, what does build back better concretely look like? Where that's in terms of the world of work. You talked about the potential for accelerating digitalization and remote working, virtual working, and so on. Whether it's changes to the social contract between the state and people, whether it's in terms of rethinking the rights of workers who are currently operating in the so-called gig economy. And certainly from my perspective, in terms of corporate responsibility, I think we will see a lot of pressure around those businesses that are very clear that, yes, we do have responsibilities beyond what the law tells us to our employees, to our customers, our suppliers, the communities in which we operate and from which we draw a license to operate, and those that continue to be rather cavalier about those kinds of questions. I've been struck very quickly how here in the country I know best, the UK, a number of media outlets have started to keep lists of what they call the saints and the sinners. And that's actually the Financial Times, which is hardly one of your left-wing media outlets. The FT is running a saints and sinners list, but also some of our very populist journalists are keeping track of some of the businesses that seem to be behaving less responsibly. So, yes, I think not everything will change, but there's going to be a lot of changes, and very happy to explore some of those in a bit more detail.
Talking about future changes, working when you want from where you want has been a long dreamed, and now people are actually forced into it, at least the people who can afford to. What do you think is the future role of the workplace at home versus the workplace at the office with your colleagues? Like, especially in regards to, let's say, corporate culture, innovation, participation, those things.
So I think, first of all, we have to be very careful, because you and I have got reasonable space to be able to have home offices. Maybe we've been used to having the luxury of being able to work at least part of our week or part of our month on a regular basis from home. We're reasonably well set up, etc. There is a world of difference for professionals like you or I and those young people, say in the middle of Berlin or here in London, who are young professionals, maybe in their late 20s, early 30s. There are 4 or 5 of them sharing a really small flat. Perhaps they don't even have a single common living room, because what was the lounge was converted into an extra bedroom to try and reduce the exorbitant rental costs that they face. It's very different in those circumstances where you're operating in really cramped conditions. You probably just desperately want to get back to the office as soon as you can. So I think that's the first distinction to make. Secondly, I think we have to recognize that some of us are more extrovert, some more introvert, but we are, at the end of the day, social animals. And I think the idea that large numbers of people for most of the time will want to work remotely when the pandemic is over, I just don't think is borne out by so much sociology and what we know about what makes human ticks. I think, though, that what we will probably see are, first of all, more organizations thinking about how can we support more of our people who would like to be able to work more of the time remotely and virtually, but probably not all of the time. So we have a good friend who used to work for a big global bank, who was required long before the crisis, to work from home 1 day a week because they simply didn't have enough desks in the global HQ for everybody to be in the building at the same time. So maybe those kind of organizations will start to encourage more people to think about working from home, say 2 days a week, rather than 1. You might well find that there's also the option of having equivalent of WeWork or other kind of shared spaces much closer to home. Because I've been talking to lots of people, you probably have too, remotely in the last few weeks, who say, one of the things I'm not missing is my 2-hour or 3-hour commute every weekday. And gosh, that gives me a lot of extra time. I can go for a run in that time. I can have a nice cycle ride round, or I can have a really great walk and clear my head and get my thoughts together for the day and so on. I don't now have the long commute. So it may also be that you start to see lots of neighborhood office centers. Some people call them a Costa Coffee or a Starbucks or another kind of coffee chain, but perhaps we will see much more organized facilities in local neighborhoods. That may well be part of the way that a lot of small market towns, for instance, which have been suffering the decline of their retail space, that may be one of the ways that you revive some of those local market town high streets and so on.
Talking about that, what do you think companies have to do right now in respect to their responsibility towards their employees, but also towards the society right now and maybe also in the future?
So I think clearly this is going to differentiate, as I said before, between those businesses that are alive to their responsibilities to their different stakeholders and take them seriously, and those that are negligent about them. And I think people will have memories through this crisis about how organizations behave. Now, clearly we have to be realistic. This is an unprecedented situation, and lots of organizations, through no fault of their own, are now financially on the brink. And therefore, simply to say, well, you should carry on paying your employees even if they can't do any work for you, etc., is just not realistic for a hotel owner or for a small restaurant owner, etc. But thinking creatively about what can we do to help our people through the crisis, so we are all in this together. So thinking about can we now develop different services? The restaurant which switches over to home delivery service for the duration of the crisis, for instance. But thinking about, can we take advantage of any government furlough schemes and so on to protect people, so that our default reaction isn't, right, we just make everyone redundant straight away and we'll just lay everybody off, and we won't pay anything more than is the absolute minimum we are contractually, legally responsible for. Instead, saying, let's see how we can do the best to support our people, so that as soon as we're able to bounce back, we are well in a position to do so. Because it will be a false economy for many organizations if they let people go, and then they can't take advantage of the hopefully the upturn once we're through the worst of the crisis.
And talking about the economy, do you think we can go forward to a more sustainable development rather than kind of just go back to simple growth?
Well, we're going to be clearly in a really tough situation in terms of government debt, etc., for quite some time. I personally hope that this will be a wake-up call, and the experience of how we've had to move so incredibly fast as societies all over the world to respond to the pandemic will give people both the confidence, but also the understanding that you can bring about change. So I think, for instance, we will see an acceleration of pressures for a more circular economic model, as opposed to the old linear model of take out of the ground, make, manufacture, use, and then throw away. I think we'll see much more of a faster switch to the circular economy models, which will also probably mean that you're less dependent on very extended global supply chains and just in time. So I think we will certainly see more pressures for building in greater durability into more manufactured products, for example, and probably also a shift in terms of people's thinking away from acquisition, having more and more stuff, to a situation where we're much more interested in experiences. And probably quite a lot of those experiences will be the quality of our interactions with friends and so on, rather than necessarily traveling so extensively around the world.
And one last personal question. You have been counseling and giving advice to governments and companies for decades now. What would you recommend an entrepreneur right now to do next?
I think clearly it depends on what is the entrepreneur's current situation. So we had 3 really dynamic young entrepreneurs at Cranfield, the business school where I teach, just a few weeks ago, and they were about to do a new business launch. In fact, next month. Now, clearly, with the coronavirus, they have to postpone that. So I think it first of all depends on what is your very explicit situation that you're currently in. But I would actually be counseling any entrepreneur. By definition, what is an entrepreneur? An entrepreneur is somebody who sees the opportunities where lots of other people only see disparate data and problems and so on. And I keep reminding myself of the late, great Peter Drucker, the kind of the father or the godfather of management gurus. And shortly before he died, Peter Drucker talked about the idea that every global problem and social issue is a business opportunity in disguise. And I think my central advice to the entrepreneurs would be, however horrendous the current crisis is, it is potentially a business opportunity in disguise. Of course, I personally hope it is an opportunity in disguise for more responsible, more sustainable, more ethical business. I'm really hopeful that part of building back better will be building back not just more sustainable, more inclusive, more responsible, but also ultimately a much fairer system as well. I think there will be a lot of pressure for lots of the jobs that we've historically looked on as being lower skilled, lower rewarded, etc. But my goodness, haven't we realized are absolutely fundamental in this crisis? The shelf stackers, the hospital porters, the delivery agents, and so on. There will have to be a fairer deal.
I totally share your hopes for a better tomorrow, David. Thank you so much for your opinion and your advice, and we'll continue that and maybe talk again in a few months and see where all this goes. Thanks a lot.
Very happy to do so. Very happy to do so.